following program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
On a quiet autumn night, in a small English village, gruesome violence is suddenly unleashed.
A young girl with a throat cut.
It's so savage. It's just like somebody had gone completely off the rail.
The most violent attack that I'd ever seen.
Police struggle to identify the killer.
Where do you find such a person? Are they likely to re-attack again?
The grisly murder leaves the community shocked and a family shattered.
Can I ask anyone to contact the police to help catch this person who did this terrible thing?
The victim's age? 15.
And people wanted results.
It's 9:30 in the evening when Catherine Smith asks her daughter Naomi to run a quick errand and post a letter. The postbox is a short walk to the end of the street. But nearly 2 hours later, Naomi hasn't come home. Concerned, Catherine wakes her husband, Brian. His first thought is Naomi is with her best friend, Emma.
We phoned Emma's mum to see if she was there. And she said, no, Naomi's not been here.
Where the devil?
Well, at this point, I was getting a bit worried.
Brian drives through the neighborhood, following the route to Emma's house. But the streets are empty. With her friend's father growing increasingly anxious, Emma offers to help in the search.
I just knew that something bad had happened.
Slowly, they make their way to a park, where local teens often hang out. The headlights illuminate the playground.
And I could see something on the grass a distance away. I thought, well, I don't really want to do this. I just left the engine running in the car and ran over to where she was.
What he discovers is a parent's worst nightmare.
Fetch Catherine and get some blankets!
I could tell when I got to Naomi, I did feel for a pulse. I knew.
His daughter's partially clothed body lies cold and lifeless.
I didn't want anybody to see her like that. But at this point, her lips were blue.
Naomi, not yet 16 years old, is Brian and Catherine Smith's only daughter. Police soon converge on the grisly crime scene. One of the first to arrive is forensics officer Paul Taberner.
Just to see young Naomi lying there, you know, on her back, her shirt pulled up and that, and you think, what's happened?
It's quickly apparent Naomi was viciously attacked with a knife.
The lacerations to the throat were very deep and severe. It was terrible, brutal attack.
Whoever did that was evil. How can anybody do that? Just... why? You know, obviously...
It was apparent that the offender would have substantial amounts of blood on the clothing.
But the motive behind the savage crime is a mystery. Senior Detective Tony Bayliss joins his colleague.
I've seen some pretty horrendous sights, but a young girl with a throat cut lying in a children's playground, and the facts surrounding it was her father who'd actually found her there, made it even more difficult to take in.
You try not to get too emotionally involved. You try to switch off from it, but it's still somebody's daughter.
It's difficult to imagine who could have done it, but certainly your mind puts together, some pretty unpleasant and nasty sort of person who would do this sort of thing.
We packed her nicely into a sterile container for transportation to the mortuary.
We knew straight away that we got a fairly complex and serious murder investigation on our hands.
It was in this recreation area late last night that Naomi's father made a gruesome discovery. In the light from his car's headlamps, he saw the body of his 15-year-old daughter.
Investigators scour the crime scene for clues.
We had cut out all the artificial flooring beneath the slide, the parts we wanted with Naomi's blood on it, and all that area was taken away and examined. The parts we looked at for the fingerprinting were just the slide area itself, the handles going up and all round and inside of the play area itself. There was lots of marks there and prints, but they were all inconclusive.
The police have failed to produce any forensic evidence pointing to the killer. Investigators now take the difficult but necessary step of interviewing Naomi's father.
In any murder investigation, the old story that the person that finds the body is your first suspect.
Distraught, Brian Smith recounts details of the previous night when a simple errand turned into an unspeakable tragedy.
The post box is 100 yards away from the house on the main road. You can't think that your daughter could come to any harm walking that short distance.
Detectives learn more about Naomi's relationship with her family.
She was a quiet girl, but she could also be funny, bubbly, mischievous. She used to love dancing in her bedroom, as all girls do. They got the hairbrush in front of the mirror and singing along with her music. Naomi was our only daughter. We were looking forward to grandchildren and looking forward to her getting married.
Naomi was a loving daughter, very much a family person. At the end of the day, she was a normal teenager living a normal teenager's life in a small village community.
It's soon obvious to police that Naomi's parents are not suspects.
They were totally the victims in this crime and had no involvement in it, so we could then focus our attentions on other suspects.
At the morgue, forensic investigators hope a post-mortem can help determine who killed Naomi and why. Detective Gino Variali joins the team.
I have to say that it was certainly the most violent attack that I'd ever seen. The injuries, to be frank, were horrific.
About 4 or 5 deep lacerations, and it cut the windpipe, the jugular. It was some sort of sharp knife, about 10 inches long.
But among Naomi's many wounds, one is unusually savage.
There was a large bite mark on her left breast.
And there's more. The killer's depravity knows no limits.
The internal examination, I think it shocked everybody. This attack was frenzied and horrific. I've seen lots of murders, and this was terrible. I mean, he'd used some sort of weapon internally on her. The clothing, that was carefully examined to see if there's anything there that hadn't been seen at the scene. The clothing, one by one, were packaged away and labelled and edited on the exhibit sheet.
Police are more determined than ever to catch the monster responsible.
You work on the assumption it looked like it could be some sort of sexual motive.
To identify their killer, they turn to an emerging science: genetic profiling.
DNA and evidence is clearly a part of everyday policing in today's day and age. But at that time, it was pretty leading-edge stuff.
Looking at the bite mark, I thought, what we'll do is I'll get a DNA kit and I'll just sample the bite area to try and get as much evidence as possible.
But there's near disaster when the vital evidence is almost washed away.
Wait, what are you doing?
Cleaning the body, what's it look like?
I stopped him from doing because I didn't want him touching anything. I don't know if he was used to doing major inquiries. He thought he was helping us. But anyway, I stopped him.
Officer Taberner tries to obtain samples from the wound.
DNA was in its early stages, particularly in relation to identifying a profile from very small samples.
So I took these just to see if anything could be done.
These would be sent off to see whether or not a DNA profile could be obtained from saliva around that bite mark.
Hazel Johnson is the forensic science expert assigned to the case.
You're under pressure to actually do the best that you can and report whatever result you've got back to the investigating officer.
Extracting a DNA profile from such a small sample is a huge challenge. And even if she does find the killer's genetic fingerprint, it won't be enough to crack the case.
At the time, in the UK, we had only just set up the National DNA Database, and there were insufficient suspect samples present on the database to actually carry out a meaningful comparison.
What it all means for investigators is that they're still no closer to catching a murderer.
Police have spent the day searching for the murder weapon which may have been dropped after Naomi Smith was attacked.
So we had a search team out, doing fingertip search, cordoned off areas, and they worked systematically with plans and maps, looking for knives or anything that could be used as a weapon.
With news that a brutal killer may be living in their midst, townspeople grow ever more anxious.
Anstey Common was a small, tightly knit community. I think its inhabitants numbered around 2,500 people.
It was heavily populated by people in the mining industry. It had that sort of intimacy from being a pit village for the sake of an expression, and so everybody was fairly close to everybody else. I think there was naturally a feeling of lock up your daughters.
Police canvass neighbourhoods near the crime scene.
It was high-profile news. There was permanent TV camera vans parked outside in front of the police station, filming coming and going. It was a lot of pressure on you to get things done, but science has its own pace. Like with the DNA, it takes so long to make a profile. We were lucky with the team we worked with, being such a small force, Warwickshire. We all worked on the murder inquiry as a team. We all knew we were all doing our best.
The other important aspect was to inform and, to a certain extent, control the media.
Emma and my husband went off the race. And there was my daughters.
Can I ask anyone who has any information, however small it is, to contact the police to help catch this person who did this terrible thing to our daughter?
Within hours of the news conference, investigators get their first break. A neighbour reports seeing Naomi just before she was murdered.
She was seen to leave her home at around 9:30 and then standing on the curb near to the post looking up and down the road, and that last sighting of her was at around 9:45.
It was probably the last sighting of her alive, but it's after that we just don't know what happened.
They need to find out, and fast. The detectives are still in the dark.
We couldn't really say how many people are involved in the initial turn. It was possible that 2 or 3.
Desperate to uncover the truth behind Naomi's murder, police open a new avenue of investigation, and Bayliss recruits forensic psychologist Paul Britton.
I was asked by Tony Bayliss if I would come along and give them some advice as to the psychological and demographic characteristics of the person who had killed Naomi.
It's useful to have an opinion from an experienced profiler so you can weigh that in with all the other information you're getting.
But to profile the killer, Britton first needs an accurate picture of the victim.
We have a media and family picture of a young girl who is saintly, sweet, fresh-faced schoolgirl, round about 15, entirely monodimensional. You have to become a part of their lives, in a sense. In this case, it meant going to the house. Need to know the real girl, and that's not going to come from her parents, because 15-year-olds don't disclose what's going on to their family. I need to know that in order to make some sense of how she got to be where she was.
Bayliss and Britton examine Naomi's bedroom, looking for clues to her private life.
Diaries, paperwork, items, so that we could see if there was any connection with any incident or issue that may lead us to the killer.
Within minutes, they make a revealing discovery.
Condoms found. And what you see there, you see the makeup of the growing young woman.
It's clear Naomi had started dating.
I mean, you obviously feel nervous.
Police learn Naomi's most recent boyfriend was 8 years her senior.
He was closely associated with Naomi and may, for whatever reason, have been out and in that area and needed to be eliminated.
Officers are dispatched to track him down. Meanwhile, the forensic team hopes it may have found a new way to identify the killer.
With the bite mark is what's happening. The layers of tissue beneath the skin has been bitten quite savagely. The blood cells under there get damaged and die, and as they die, they get darker and they show up as these bruises and marks.
As the bite mark becomes more pronounced, investigators believe it may reveal crucial details about the killer's teeth.
We photographed the bite mark both in normal photography and using ultraviolet and infrared lenses.
This effort looks promising, but elsewhere leads are crumbling. Police learn Naomi's boyfriend was nowhere near Ansley Common on the night of the murder.
After that, it becomes necessary to gather further information. So you're looking at the scene of the crime. Remembering all of the time that here you're looking at a young girl who's just 15. So all of that loads into the difficulty of the case.
Still with no suspects, police hope an appeal by Naomi's best friend will prompt someone, somewhere, to come forward.
I saw what that evil person did to her. Her family and I would find it hard to live without her. Someone must know who he is.
The quiet village of Ansley Common remains haunted by the murder of 15-year-old Naomi Smith. Detectives have interviewed nearly 300 people in the search for a suspect.
During the investigation, there was something like 3,500 separate lines of inquiry.
Police begin to doubt if their massive effort will pay off. Then, another lead surfaces.
There was one witness, and I think they lived fairly close to the entrance to the recreation ground, who said they'd heard running footsteps and seen a blonde, described as spiky-haired man, running from the scene.
Police move quickly, preparing a composite sketch of the young man. They also issue a call for anyone who might fit the description to come forward.
Several individuals phoned into the incident room following an appeal for witnesses or information about anybody that was in the area.
Detectives interview all the callers. One in particular stands out.
Edwin Hopkins volunteered the fact that he had been in the area at the relevant time.
The 19-year-old tells authorities he was visiting his sister that night and only left briefly to buy some beer.
He provided a statement which essentially gave an account of him leaving his sister's and cycling to local AAA off license.
The story raises a red flag. Hopkins says he doesn't know the victim, but his trip to the shop would have taken him right past the postbox. Now a possible suspect. Police follow up with his sister, Julie.
His sister gave him an alibi and said he was at home at the time of the murder.
His 5-minute trip to the shop would not have given Hopkins enough time to commit the murder. It's another dead end.
That left us in a pretty difficult position.
6 days after Naomi's death, the community gathers for a memorial service.
Naomi Smith's father and her school friend who discovered the body joined the local community in a service to try and exorcise the horror of what took place a week ago.
Deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
All you can think of then is that you will do your utmost to find that person. And it's one of the driving forces. And it does help you to motivate, to put everything into it. I went up to the mortuary to take Naomi out. I sort of talked to her as I said, "Come on, Naomi, don't worry, we'll catch them for you, my love. We'll sort it out."
As public pressure continues to mount, police now target any violent offenders living in the vicinity.
Information was coming in from both the community and from our own research that there were 3 or 4 people in that area who could be responsible for this offence. Their background indicated they had the potential to commit this type of offence.
Ultimately, 5 men are identified as possible suspects. Fearing the killer could strike again at any time, Bayliss makes a bold move.
I took the decision that it was better to strike quickly. So it was important to arrest them so that we could exploit any forensic opportunities. Obviously, the longer you leave it, any traces of blood or DNA from the victim would disappear.
At 7 a.m. on September the 21st, police conduct a series of coordinated raids.
Such was the media interest at that time that they got wind of this operation and they were there to actually record the arrests, which caused some controversy.
The woman's at the back door, he's in the bedroom. He's in custody, okay?
It's a big and very public gamble. Police risk losing community support and their own reputation.
We had close on 100 officers, both in arrests and recovering forensic material. And then there was the detailed interviews of the people concerned to find out where they were on the night, what they were doing. We had high hopes that we were going to catch the offender.
At the same time, the forensic team is making solid progress with the bite mark found on Naomi's body. They now have a much clearer picture of the teeth that inflicted the horrendous wound.
At least one of them was really upset. So we know that if we could get a suspect, you can make a cast, as you do when you have your false teeth made. And that could be used then for a comparison against the heart mark on Naomi's breast.
Armed with their new investigative tool, police are eager to test the 5 suspects.
Just use dental wax, put it in, bite down on it, make an impression, they do a casting of it, and then you've got a copy of your teeth.
It's an ingenious technique. The killer can't possibly disguise his own bite pattern. Detectives examine the suspects' molds one by one, but they're dismayed at what they find.
It was becoming obvious that these people were probably not responsible. After a couple of days, they were all eliminated.
None of the 5 suspects rounded up in the dragnet is a match. Authorities have gambled and lost.
As it turned out, we weren't successful, and if you look at it in the other way, if we hadn't done that and had missed the opportunity to gather forensic evidence and it turned out that one of those people was responsible, we could have well been criticised for leaving it too long before we actually took any action.
Though the search for suspects has stalled, profiler Paul Britton thinks he may be onto something. A review of the first eyewitness account of Naomi mailing her letter reveals an overlooked detail.
She had stopped, she turned, and someone had drawn her attention. She hadn't seemed alarmed. She had simply walked over towards whoever was talking to her.
It's a crucial fact. It may explain how Naomi ended up at the playground.
She's not going to quietly wander along with a stranger into this place. This is somewhere she'd go with someone that she knew. She was sufficiently streetwise to look after herself generally, but hopelessly inexperienced in what really happened, especially in male sexuality, if things got out of hand.
To learn more, Britton interviews Naomi's friend Emma.
We need your help. Now, the close friend was traumatized. Her best friend had been ripped apart in the most appalling way.
Despite her trauma, Emma provides Britton with the information he needs.
What would confirm is that Naomi, of course, had a much richer life than people had been aware of. Naomi's progress in adult relationships was much more developed than people had expected.
Who met Naomi in the park is still a mystery. But why Emma went there in search of her friend becomes clear.
It was always an issue. Why Emma went along to look for Naomi. And of course, what we discovered is because she thought Naomi might be there with a boy. And she wanted to warn her so that she wouldn't be caught.
With this new insight into the horrific event, Britain constructs his profile of the killer.
Naomi was assaulted and died very quickly, so it's not the sadist, it's not the ritualistic killer's hallmark at all. It's an inexperienced, angry outburst. The thing that was clear is that he would have been doing something like this before. Now, he wouldn't have killed anybody. He probably hadn't got to raping them, but there would have been assaults, there would have been attempts, and it would have been in this area, because this is his ground.
Working from this profile, police draw up a new list of suspects.
My view was, you were looking for someone who was in his late teens or early 20s, no more than that. And he lived very close. My estimate was probably not more than 400 yards away from the scene of the crime itself.
Based solely on age and proximity to the murder scene, detectives conduct yet another round of interviews.
We were able to start to process individuals of the suspect age range who were in Annesley Common on the night of the murder. And against their name, we carried out research with both our own records and the records of other public authorities whose attention they may have come to.
You're looking at people who live half a mile from the scene, put them lower in the list than someone who lives, as I've said, 400 yards, and so on. So if you take each of those parameters and you build a pyramid, you start at the top of that pyramid and work systematically through it.
You know, everybody wanted a quick conclusion, but you can only move as fast as the inquiry will take you.
But will it be fast enough to catch the killer before he strikes again? Nearly 2 months into the murder investigation, police continue to narrow their search for a suspect.
We were able to produce a prioritised list of individuals whom we should seek to eliminate.
Here.
Meanwhile, the DNA lab reports a major development. They have found 2 genetic profiles in the samples taken from the bite wound.
It was really, a major breakthrough and so gratifying, because at the early stages of DNA enhancement.
We had what we call a mixed profile. We had Naomi's profile present in that result, plus the profile from another individual.
It's an intriguing discovery. Traces of what can only be the killer's DNA.
Bayliss had a decision to make. How was he going to move it forward? And what he decided was to use DNA profiling to attempt to exclude people.
In an unprecedented move, police decide to conduct a blanket DNA test.
Actually, I think the police used the media to actually announce that they were going to carry out a screen and ask for volunteers to come forward.
All local men between the ages of 15 and 28 will be swabbed, whether they're suspects or not.
And what they did was to rank order all of the men in the half-a-mile radius.
As police begin testing the men on their list, one name stands out. Edwin Hopkins. They've talked to him before.
Based on what we knew about Edwin Hopkins, he was fairly high up that list.
Hopkins had been out on that night and would have gone past where Naomi was at about the time she disappeared. And he was of the right age range.
Though he fits the profile, he has a solid alibi provided by his sister. To eliminate him as a suspect, police run his DNA.
This sample is then compared with the result that we've obtained from the breast swab from Naomi.
Investigators anxiously wait for the results. Not yet sure if the new DNA test will deliver.
I walked in. Tony Bayliss looked at me. He said, Mr. Taberner, I want a word with you. The room went quiet. Everybody looked, put their heads down. I thought, oh, God, something gone wrong here. And he said, you know that sample you took from the bite mark? I says, yes. And I was shaking. I was nervous, thinking something's gone wrong. Come over to me. He said, well, I've got to tell you something.
Congratulations.
He said, we've got an ident on it. And I swore at him. In front of everybody. I'll remember that.
A full DNA profile matched an individual called Edwin Hopkins.
It's a huge relief. After more than 2 months of investigation, the case may finally be cracked.
We knew we had the right person. I remember going through my head sort of saying, I told you we'd get them, love, I told you we'd get them. And it was just a great feeling.
Police go after their suspect at his parents' home.
If Hopkins was the offender, which the DNA was indicating he was, then somebody in his family was lying. So in our strategy, we decided it was necessary to arrest those people who said that he was at home as well, because obviously they were perverting the course of justice by giving him a false alibi.
A search of Hopkins' bedroom reveals more damning evidence.
I think in total we recovered 10 knives from his home address. They were all sent off for forensic examination, but none were able to be matched as the weapon that caused Naomi's injury.
Without a murder weapon, police have doubts whether they can convict Hopkins on DNA evidence alone. In 1995, genetic profiling is a largely untested tool for prosecutors.
You've got to remember, this is very early stages of DNA forensic investigation.
It may not stand up in court.
Well, I wasn't actually sure we were going to get a conviction.
Detectives need more physical evidence. They hope to get it with one last crucial test.
So, a cast was taken of Hopkins' mouth.
If Hopkins' teeth don't match the bite mark, the investigation could fall apart. After 2 months of intense investigation and a tidal wave of public concern, police finally have a murder suspect in custody.
Does that look familiar?
19-year-old Edwin Hopkins.
I didn't know Hopkins. Never seen Hopkins before in my life. We found out later on that Naomi actually knew him. He'd been babysitting with Emma, and he was there. And as far as I know, it's the only time she saw him.
Hopkins lied to authorities about not knowing the victim. He now fits the killer's profile better than ever.
He maintained the account that he provided to us when he was first spoken to, and provided no explanation as to how his DNA came to be on Naomi's body.
When Hopkins gave his DNA sample, he was aware that he hadn't left the scene. So he was working on the assumption a lot of people did, that DNA just came from semen. He obviously wasn't aware that we were getting it from the bite mark.
As police wait for results from the dental comparison that could finally convict Hopkins, they dig into his past.
And it was necessary to to do deep background checks on him in order to make sure that the evidence, in addition to the DNA, was there.
What they find is exactly what Paul Britton had predicted. The suspect had assaulted someone 2 years earlier.
A complaint had been made that he had attacked a young woman very close to the spot in a field. He'd attempted to pull her to the ground and attack her sexually in exactly the same way that Naomi had been attacked.
But Hopkins was never charged in the assault.
So our offender wasn't on the database.
But now, detectives believe they know exactly what happened on the night of September the 7th, 1995.
Naomi went out, delivered the letter.
At the same time, Hopkins was leaving his sister's house.
Edwin Hopkins cycled to AAA off licence. His route would have put him on a collision course for meeting with Naomi at 9:45.
And saw her standing there, realised who she was, knew her as an acquaintance, stopped.
Hey!
And then she met Hopkins, got talking to him.
He enticed her towards the playground.
And what he is then hoping and expecting is that she is going to perform sexually for him. She's walked up to this slide, and there has the beginning of intimacy has occurred. And of course, during this, he has become increasingly aroused.
Closer. Less you're shy.
His focus has now become entirely on his sexual fulfillment.
He launched some sort of assault on her, which led very quickly to him inflicting this bite mark on her breast.
And when the girl basically says, no, 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 his anger then comes through and he wants to punish her.
And whether or not she then struggled, screamed, it certainly led him to slash her throat. After he killed her or she was in the process of dying, it may have been some sort of act of retribution or frustration by the fact of what had happened up till then, that he carried out this mutilation.
So why him? Well, you have a person who had developed an insular life. We know that he had an interest in bladed weapons, so there's going to have been some sort of fantasy life, some sort of acting out of a very macho, aggressive persona, and that and his sexuality became very close together. The need to control, the need to express yourself in a dominant way, and a very strong lust urge, coupled with incompetence, coming together.
It's a solid theory, but getting a conviction still hinges on Hopkins' dental impression.
It was a crucial moment in the investigation. It was key to the success in establishing the offender.
Finally, the results arrive.
The dental impression, it was a perfect match. The front left-hand tooth was misaligned, and one of the to the right at the backside was misaligned, and they matched perfectly.
100% certainty that it was Hopkins' teeth that made that bite.
Police now have all the physical evidence they need. The only loose end is the alibi provided by Hopkins' sister.
She realised that she could be prosecuted for a fairly serious offence herself.
Julie is no longer willing to lie for her brother. Her new account further condemns him.
His sister puts his movements as arriving home around 10:30 and not 10 p.m. as he stated, and also provided evidence that when he returned to the house he'd his hair was wet as though he'd just come out of the shower.
Detectives now conclude Hopkins went home to his parents' house after the murder. Without their knowledge, he cleaned himself up, then returned to his sister's place.
I've often thought about Hopkins. What brought this on? Was it jealousy? Had somebody taunted him? I think this is one of those things, you'll never really know what's inside the mind of a murderer.
He never provided us with an account as to what happened, and so it's very difficult to understand or rationalise what happened that night in his encounter with Naomi, which would have led him to commit such a horrendous attack on a 15-year-old girl.
More than a year later, the case finally goes to trial.
There are some cases where you know it's going to go to the wire with the jury, but this one, with the scientific evidence we had, was pretty conclusive.
People talk about evil, and it's difficult. Having seen what Naomi went through, it's very difficult not to put Edwin Hopkins into that category of evil.
Hopkins maintains his innocence. But on January the 30th, 1997, he is convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
There's nothing like hearing the foreman of a jury stand up and say guilty.
In a case like this, in a murder, in such a savage, brutal murder, a needless murder of a young girl, a young innocent girl, it's an immense sense of relief that somebody's been brought to justice.
His parents left court this afternoon expressing satisfaction with the verdict.
Very pleased with the verdict. It's what we wanted.
I remember looking in the cell when Hopkins was sitting in there. I looked at him and I thought, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. He looked like the boy next door. You'd pass him in the street and you wouldn't think anything of it. Then he goes to prove you can't judge a book by its cover.
Apparently he's due to be released in the next couple of years. As far as I'm concerned, he should never get out. People like that don't change.
You're always touched. You can't help but be touched by the loss and sense of grief that the parents experience.
It's always in my mind every day. It's been a long time. But seems like yesterday.